Test 1, 2.
A man does not go to the village square solely because he cannot see the moon from his compound. He can see it quite clearly. But we come together because it is good for kinsmen to do so. Ndobanye, is that not what our elders have taught us? That the warmth of brothers is a different kind of fire. The kind of warmth that is good for our bodies and our soul. And also, because a vision seen by one man is a dream, but a vision seen by a region, that one name is a mandate. A collective rewriting their fate, chapter after chapter, page after page. Our own very exodus. Maka onyekwe, chiekwe. If a man says yes, his chi says yes with him. And for too long, we have been stars scattered across the sky, shining bright but shining alone. But Southeast Vision 2050 is the moment the constellation connects. It's the moment where we let go of the internal frictions and the silos of the past. Today, we trade friction for fusion. We are burying the hatchets to pick up the digital pen. This is the era of regional reintegration. We are weaving a seamless economic fabric where, when one state breathes, the whole region pulses. Our governors are the lead architects, by the way. 5 visionaries building one fortress. Look at the blueprints they are laying down. In Abia, we are tapping into the industrial heartbeat of Aba, turning it into a manufacturing powerhouse. Call it China of Africa. Anambra, we are championing the development of new cities to redefine the industrial landscape in the region. What about Ebonyi? Ebonyi, the salt of the nation, is becoming the bedrock of agriculture and infrastructure, feeding the vision from the soil up. In Enugu, the coal city is reigniting with tech and innovation hubs, a home for digital pioneers. And in Imo, we see a gateway of hydrocarbons, hospitality, and human capital fueling our regional talent and project pipeline. When these 5 fingers of the hand close, they don't become a fist for war, no. They become a grip on our future, a fist for wealth, a fist for stability. They are coding a new law that we are stronger as a common market than as individual players. But this vision is not a wall, it is a bridge. And we are building a Southeast that is the engine room for all Nigerians, From the north to the west, from the delta to the middle belt, if you have a dream, the east is your workshop. We are creating a sanctuary for foreign investors who seek greed and transparency. We are transforming the red mud of our fathers into a global trade zone. We are building the Silicon Valley of Africa right here. So my dear, if you want to see the future of African commerce, you know where to look. You look Southeast. Activate Southeast Vision 2050. 50 is the point of perfect symmetry. 50 is where the center finally holds. Projects Southeast Vision 2050 is the bridge between our before, our now, and our after. So wherever you are, activate Southeast Vision 2050. Here, we don't wait for the stars to align. We code the alignment. We are building a regional OS, an operating system locked in on growth, a tribe encoded with dreams and optimized for global impact. We are taking the chi into the cloud. So Omunna, clock it, lock in, activate Southeast Vision 2050. A man does not go to the village square solely because he cannot see the moon from his compound. He can see it quite clearly. But we come together because it is good for kinsmen to do so. Ndobanye, is that not what our elders have taught us? That the warmth of brothers is a different kind of fire. The kind of warmth that is good for our bodies and our soul. And also, because a vision seen by one man is a dream, but a vision seen by a region, that one name is a mandate. A collective rewriting their fate. Chapter after chapter, page after page, our own very exodus. Maka onye kwe, chi kwe. If a man says yes, his chi says yes with him. And for too long, we have been stars scattered across the sky, shining bright but shining alone. But Southeast Vision 2050 is the moment the constellation connects. It's the moment where we let go of the internal frictions and the silos of the past. Today, we trade friction for fusion. We are burying the hatchets to pick up the digital pen. This is the era of regional reintegration. We are weaving a seamless economic fabric where, when one state breathes, the whole region pulses. Our governors are the lead architects, by the way. 5 visionaries building one fortress. Look at the blueprints they are laying down. In Abia, we are tapping into the industrial heartbeat of Aba, turning it into a manufacturing powerhouse. Call it China of Africa. Anambra, we are championing the development of new cities to redefine the industrial landscape in the region. What about Ebonyi? Ebonyi, the salt of the nation, is becoming the bedrock of agriculture and infrastructure, feeding the vision from the soil up. In Enugu, the coast city is reigniting with tech and innovation hubs, a home for digital pioneers. And in Imo, we see a gateway of hydrocarbons, hospitality, and human capital fueling our regional talent and project pipeline. When these 5 fingers of the hand close, they don't become a fist for war, no. They become a grip on our future, a fist for wealth, a fist for stability. They are coding a new law that we are stronger as a common market than as individual players. But this vision is not a wall, it is a bridge. And we are building a Southeast that is the engine room for all Nigerians, from the north to the west, from the delta to the middle belt. If you have a dream, the East is your workshop. We are creating a sanctuary for foreign investors who seek greed and transparency. We are transforming the red mud of our fathers into a global trade zone. We are building the Silicon Valley of Africa right here. So my dear, if you want to see the future of African commerce, you know where to look. You look Southeast. Activate Southeast Vision 2050.
For any man who is an able person, Enugu remains undisputed capital of the Southeast. Today marks a milestone in the history of the Southeast as we come together to chart a shared path for the future we all desire. So this is not just a gathering, it is a collective commitment to the prosperity and progress of our people.
The Southeast Development Commission was established to help address long-standing infrastructure and development gaps, while also providing a platform for strategic, forward-looking regional planning.
Every participant here, physically and virtually, is not an observer, but we are all contributors. The ideas generated in these rooms will directly shape the Vision 2050 plan and the framework, its priorities, and ultimately its execution pathway.
For the Southeast, this is an opportunity to consolidate strengths, address structural constraints, and rightfully position itself as a competitive and investable region within the Nigerian economy.
Southeast is blessed with immense human capital, entrepreneurial dynamism, cultural cohesion, and a strong spirit of resilience. However, unlocking the full potential of our region requires coordinated planning, long-term visioning, policy alignment, and strong collaboration across states, sectors, and institutions.
The regional economy functions as a single and unified ecosystem. So the infrastructure that supports that economy must also be planned and delivered cohesively.
In the Southeast, you have something like about 1,000 hotels across the region. You have something like about 400 major national festivals. You have destinations, caves, waterfalls. This government here in Enugu is building the highest skywalk on the continent. They're also building a zip line. They're also damming this place. So they are also making the efforts already. The Rangers Stadium is becoming a dome. So we're seeing that people are investing, but guess what? If you don't have the soft power, if you don't invest in the people, you cannot build the asset.
We heard that Harvard was learning about how the Igbo apprentice system is working, but how are we even packaging that system? How are we even packaging? They've done a survey. How are we telling that story? How are we capturing that experience? How are we making it something of a wonder, something that people can come and learn and imagine and recreate? That's even a tourism asset that we have not even explored.
For any man who is an able person, Enugu remains undisputed capital of the Southeast. Today marks a milestone in the history of the Southeast as we come together to chart a shared path for the future we all desire. So this is not just a gathering, it is a collective commitment to the prosperity and progress of our people.
The Southeast Development Commission was established to help address long-standing infrastructure and development gaps, while also providing a platform for strategic, forward-looking regional planning.
Every participant here, physically and virtually, is not an observer, but we are all contributors. The ideas generated in these rooms will directly shape the Vision 2050 plan and the framework, its priorities, and ultimately its execution pathway.
For the Southeast, this is an opportunity to consolidate strengths, address structural constraints, and rightfully position itself as a competitive and investable region within the Nigerian economy.
Southeast is blessed with immense human capital, entrepreneurial dynamism, cultural cohesion, and a strong spirit of resilience. However, unlocking the full potential of our region requires coordinated planning, long-term visioning, policy alignment, and strong collaboration across states, sectors, and institutions.
The regional economy functions as a single and unified ecosystem. So the infrastructure that supports that economy must also be planned and delivered cohesively.
In the Southeast, you have something like about 1,000 hotels across the region. You have something like about 400 major national festivals. You have destinations, caves, waterfalls. This government here in Enugu is building the highest skywalk on the continent. They're also building a zip line. They're also damming this place. So they are also making the efforts already. The Rangers Stadium is becoming a dome. So we're seeing that people are investing, but guess what? If you don't have the soft power, if you don't invest in the people, you cannot build the asset.
We heard that Harvard was learning about how the Igbo apprentice system is working, but how are we even packaging that system? How are we even packaging? They've done a survey. How are we telling that story? How are we capturing that experience? How are we making it something of a wonder, something that people can come and learn and imagine and recreate? That's even a tourism asset that we have not even explored.
Stakeholders Forum. But before we start, let me quickly welcome some of our very distinguished guests who are here. I'd like to welcome the Managing Director of the Southeast Development Commission, a young man who has shown that with the energy of the youth and the wisdom of the sage, you can move mountain. Mr. Mark Okoye, good morning. I welcome you this morning. Can we put our hands together for our ladies and gentlemen? And then while we are doing that, for some of us who are scattered at the back, can we come together? The optics is important so that we can fill up the middle seats here, please. Thank you. Also here, and she's been absolutely consistent in the last 4 days. It will be a pleasure to have you in the Senate, man. I welcome here the former First Lady of Ondo State, a woman aiming to be in the Senate, and God will give it to you. I welcome here Dr. Mrs. Betty Anyao Akeredolu. I welcome you. Thank you very much. The Managing Director of AfriInvest, West Africa, Mr. Ike Chioke, is also here with us this morning. We'll be listening to his voice in terms of capital mobilization later today. One of the finest legal minds from this part of the world who will be moderating our next session is also here, quietly. Ms. Stella Duru, I celebrate you, I welcome you. Thank you very much, thank you. Also here, I have Chinedu Onwigwe, Technical Assistant, Public-Private Partnership to the Honorable Minister for Foreign Affairs. Also here, we have Kene Baru, Group President and CEO, Comworld Cinemas, also here with us. And then from Marlin's Chambers, Chuka Udemezwe is also here with us. Thank you very much. You have your microphone there? And so, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, welcome officially to day 4 of this Stakeholders Forum. The vision that we have spent the last 3 days to craft is about creating opportunities, is about building infrastructure, is about nurturing human capital and fostering innovation. But all of this we might not be able to stand the test of time if there are no capital, which is why our last session, and very critical session, all of the sessions we've had, none had white seats. Because capital is important, the seats are different and the personnel are different. So that will be our first session, but I think she has a few recognitions to do before we kick off with the first session.
We also have with us the MD CEO of Southwest Development Commission, Honorable Charles Akiola. Good to have you with us. Thank you for being here indeed. At the beginning of this forum, myself and Ebere here had argued a little bit as to whose name sounds better, Ebere or Ebele. And while we had that argument going, in the course of the event, what we found was that for every time Congo or Ugo or Madame Jane called out Ebere, we both turned. For every time they called out Ebele, they got our attention. So we simply said, we found out that we are really aligned and we want the same thing, the mercy of God, which is what the name means, the mercy of God for ourselves and for the progress and success of this initiative. What it also means is that be you from Imo, Anambra, Abia, Enugu, Ebonyi, We all want the same thing, sustainable prosperity for the Southeast. So this goes to the naysayers, really, who say this won't work. We say to them in Igbo language, "Owo kosigo tinyejara." In other words, yes, that deserves applause. In other words, it would not only work, it would exceed expectations, and it will outlive all of us. And for those who have cited the errors of our sister agencies or commissions as reasons why this will not work, we say to them, that's exactly why it would work. Because we've seen the errors, we've seen the pitfalls, and we shall avoid them. Best part, the commission is led by the remarkable Mark Okoye, who of course has surrounded or has for himself an amazing team. So what more can we say? Success is definitely predictable. So let me do this and see who would understand it. From the video yesterday, we saw this. So Umuibo, Omona, clock it. Yeah, so this will definitely work. Over to you, Ever.
Thank you very much. Also here with us, we have the Director General of the Securities and Exchange Commission, Dr. Momotimi Agama is here with us. Let's appreciate him. The Capital Market is here with us. The Managing Director and CEO of Ministry of Finance Incorporated, Dr. Amsok Takang, is also here. And the ED and COO of Infra Credit, Daniel Moller, is also here. The Managing Director and CEO, Southwest Development Commission, Ekabo, Mr. Charles Dijiakiola, is also here with us. I welcome you. And then Innocent Ejolu, Portfolio Manager, UNDP, is also here. So distinguished ladies and gentlemen, as always, let me especially welcome the young ones as they are stepping in. Obinna Inyedioha is also here with us. I'd like to welcome you. Let's appreciate him. And so without much ado, as our children try to settle down, the first in 25 years, MD, the girl that will take over as MD of SCDC is among the people going up there now. So without much ado, let us kick off with our first session. And this will be moderated by a woman who is a partner in the law firm of Banwo and Igodalo, a full-service law firm in Nigeria. She handles some of Nigeria's high-value, high-profile transformational oil and gas, energy, infrastructure, and commercial transactions. She's leading the team in Banwo and Igodalo in its capacity as project counsel to the SCDC. She was a key member of the ad hoc committee that produced a policy framework for the establishment of the Southeast Investment Company Limited. She has earned and continues to earn international recognition for the quality of her work. She's a top rank as a leading lawyer and recognized as a woman leader in global legal practice. Please welcome here, Ms. Stella Duru.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. I would be resting on all established protocols, and I would like to set the tone for the conversations we're going to have this morning. I would like to start by reminding everyone listening to me today that Vision 2050 is not a slogan. It's a financing question. For Nigeria, and particularly for the Southeast, development will not be delivered by aspiration alone, nor by external capital indefinitely. It will be delivered by our ability to mobilize domestic revenue efficiently, credibly, and fairly, as well as translate that revenue into visible public value. The Southeast represents a unique paradox, as it does not suffer from the lack of enterprise, yet appears to be challenged by a lack of structure and cohesion. We know that capital is generated daily in the Southeast, in our markets, in the manufacturing clusters, in the logistics corridors, and across a vast global diaspora. Yet paradoxically, this wealth rarely shows up as long-term infrastructure, resilient public finance, or scalable development outcomes. We will all agree that the Southeast is arguably one of Nigeria's most entrepreneurial and commercially vibrant regions, yet it remains structurally underfinanced. We all agree that few regions in Nigeria trade, build, and innovate as instinctively as the Southeast. Indeed, today, the question before us is not whether wealth exists, but how it can be captured, structured, and reinvested in a way that is sustainable, inclusive, and investment grade. Financing Vision 2050 therefore requires more than speeches. We've heard quite a few in the last few days. It requires more than higher taxes and or new instruments. What it needs is institutional credibility, innovative structured finance solutions, and reimagining how subnational governments will partner with the private sector and their citizens. This is really the central tension we must all confront as we discuss financing the Southeast Vision 2050. The problem is not ambition. It's not even capital. It is how domestic and diaspora resources are mobilized, trusted, pooled, and deployed. And at the very heart of this challenge lies the fiscal social contract. Citizens and businesses at home and abroad are willing to contribute when they believe that revenue is captured transparently and converted into roads, power, water, education, and opportunity. Where people's belief in the credibility of a plan or a process is weak, the capital will stay informal. It will stay offshore. Where the social contract is weak, informality deepens, compliance erodes, and development stalls. However, where that fiscal social contract is strong, growth follows. We must keep in mind that the Southeast infrastructure deficits, the absence of transport connectivity, industrial power, and urban services are not just developmental gaps. They are missed revenue opportunities. Every broken road leaks productivity. Every unreliable power source pushes enterprise further into informality, and every informal transaction is capital that cannot be structured, leveraged, or scaled. So, financing Vision 2050 demands a new approach, one that recognizes commerce as a development engine, treats diaspora capital as patient strategic funding rather than sentimental remittances, and uses structured finance to convert regional economic activity into bankable assets. So today, we are going to discuss differently about how we're going to move from fragmented enterprise to coordinated financing, from trust deficits to credible institutions, and from potential to execution. And it is on this note, I am very pleased to introduce my panel of experienced professionals who have worked at the intersection of finance, structure, and development, and who understand what it takes to turn our region's economic strength into sustainable public value. Two of the persons I will call today will deliver presentations, and the other gentleman will sit on the stage. One of our speakers happens to also be a member of the panel session whilst we listen to this. And these gentlemen will be the ones that will help us attempt to crack the code. What they do not know is that I gave each of them a nickname. So as you hear your name after the nickname, I will please ask you to please join me on the stage. So the first person I will be calling is who I have nicknamed the Capital Markets Architect. That's Dr. Emomo Timi Agama. He is the Director General of the Securities and Exchange Commission, who was appointed by President Bola Ahmed Tinubu in April 2024 and confirmed by the Senate in June 2024. He sits at the center of Nigeria's investment ecosystem. He possesses deep understanding of the capital markets, ranging from capital markets regulation, financial market development, and economic and infrastructure growth. Please welcome Dr. Agama. You're welcome, sir. Thank you. And the next gentleman I would be inviting to the stage is nicknamed the Institutional Capital Mobilizer, and that's Mr. Daniel Mueller, the Executive Director and Chief Operating Officer of InfraCredit. InfraCredit is Nigeria's specialized infrastructure credit enhancement institution. Mr. Mueller understands how domestic pension funds and long-term capital can be de-risked and structured into infrastructure finance at scale. Mr. Mueller, please join us on the stage. Thank you. Is he here? Whilst we wait for him to join us, the next gentleman I will be asking to join me on the stage would be the subnational fiscal architect. That's Dr. Nathaniel Urama, the Commissioner of Finance for Enugu State. He represents the fiscal engine room of regional development and understands the realities of state-level finance, public sector reform, and implementation. Indeed, he's been recognized as leading Enugu State's fiscal strategy and revenue management, and under his leadership, Enugu State has recorded significant increases in internally generated revenue, positioning the state as an emerging fiscal contender amongst all Nigerian states. Dr. Urama, please. A round of applause for him as he joins us on the stage. And the next gentleman, and I'm sure you're all wondering, just men? We will get there, is the person I have nicknamed the Institutional Bridge. This is no other than Mr. Innocent Fred Ejolu, who is the Portfolio Advisor from UNDP Nigeria. He's leading the charge on how we integrate these diverse funding sources into a single cohesive framework, ensuring that our regional ambitions align with global standards of governance, data, and sustainability. Mr. Ejolu, please. Thank you. And now I'm happy to invite a lady who I call the diaspora conduit, Ms. Ijoma Okoli, who is the founder and CEO of Umuigbo Unite. And they represent the immense social and economic power of the global Southeast community. She understands that the diaspora is not just a source of remittances, but a sophisticated pool of capital and expertise waiting for the right platform to engage. Ms. Ijoma Okoli, please. A round of applause as she joins us on stage. We do have a large panel. And the next gentleman to join us would be the public sector finance maverick, Dr. Armstrong Ume Tankang. I hope I didn't do wrong with the name. He is the Managing Director and Chief Executive Officer of the Ministry of Finance Incorporated. He brings deep expertise in asset structuring, sovereign investment strategy, and the mobilization of public assets into productive capital platforms. Please welcome Dr. Takang. And then the last two gentlemen are speakers for today. The first of whom is Mr. Obinna Ihedioha, who is the Executive Director, People, Stakeholders, and Communication, Nigerian Revenue Service. He was recently appointed into this role. He's a senior level strategist with over 24 years in public sector reform, governance, and portfolio management. He would be delivering a presentation today titled Strengthening Domestic Revenue Mobilization and the Fiscal Social Contract. Last but not the least is a gentleman who I have dubbed the Infrastructure and Private Capital Strategies. This is Dr. Ike Chioke, who is the Group Managing Director of AfriInvest West Africa. He possesses deep insights into the location of available private capital, understands the risk and return profile that private investors require to commit funds into Vision 2050. And in this capacity, he is indeed best suited to deliver the presentation titled Mobilizing Public, Private, and Blended Capital to Deliver the Southeast Vision 2020. Please welcome Dr. Ike Chioke. I would be handing over the mic to him now to take us through his presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Stella. Your Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, and special appreciation, recognition to the MD of the Southeast Development Commission, Mr. Mark Okoye, who has really demonstrated capacity by mobilizing the great and the good of Nigeria to come to Enugu this week to partake in the Southeast Vision 2050. It's my humble privilege to be here to talk about mobilizing public, private, and blended capital to deliver the Southeast Vision 2050. Obviously, I'm surrounded by very distinguished experts in the financial services industry. So I'll try to make this very light-headed and snappy so that we can get to the subject of the day and have a more interactive engagement. My intervention will be in two sections. First, I'll talk about the scale and nature of the financing needs required to accelerate the development of the Southeast region. And then secondly, I'll talk about the pathways to mobilizing capital in order to achieve SEV 2050. So, let's start by spotlighting the Southeast, the 5 Southeastern states of Abia, Anambra, Ebonyi, Enugu, and Imo State. And you can see the size of the landmass. They all contribute to a total of just under 30,000 square kilometers. In terms of population, the region contributes 27.6 million people based on estimates as of 2024. In terms of GDP, you're looking at a total of 34 trillion naira. And in terms of internally generated revenue, and this is using the number for 2024, we couldn't get all the data for everyone for 2025. We've seen a total of 300 trillion naira. But if you contrast that to the fact, the receipts from the federal accounts, contributions, the amounts they get from the federal government every month, the total comes to just over 1.1 trillion naira. So clearly there's a big gap between what they receive from the federal government and what they're able to generate internally. So there's work to be done there. But if you put the Southeast region as one block, the most likely country you might want to compare it to will be Rwanda. Again, similar sizes. Southeast at 29,000 square kilometers, Rwanda at 26,000 square kilometers. Population of 30 million compared to 15 million. GDP of $22.7 billion compared to $14.3 billion. But GDP per capita now falls down because of the larger base of population in the Southeast at $821 per person compared to $1,000 per person in Rwanda. The main economic drivers in the Southeast, manufacturing, agriculture is missing there, trading, of course, small and medium-sized enterprises. In Rwanda, however, it's mostly services, tourism, ICT, and agriculture. Now, the differences now begin to show. In terms of road network, the South here has 26,000 kilometers of roads, only 30% of which are motorable. In Rwanda, they have 38,000 kilometers of road, most of which are very motorable. Electricity access, we have 75% that have access to electricity. It doesn't mean that they get it 24/7. Most of us in the cities can acknowledge that the power supply is very intermittent. In Rwanda, however, we've got 85% access to electricity, and electricity is quite stable. I've been to Kigali many times, and many of the hotels don't even understand the need to have a generator, a standby generator. And that shows you in the grid power allocation in the Southeast, we're barely getting about 70 megawatts of power from the grid dropped into EEDC, while Rwanda has over 406 megawatts of power. And that is the differentiating factor. But let's step back for a moment and look at the infrastructure gap. According to the World Bank study, Nigeria needs over $3 trillion of investment over the next 30 years in order to bridge this infrastructure gap. This will mean an expenditure of about $100 billion per year for the next 30 years. If you understand that the Southeast represents about 10% of the GDP of Nigeria, and this is not to understate the size of the Southeast, it's simply because Lagos as an economy takes a lion's share of about 40% of Nigeria's GDP, and so as a region, the Southeast takes 10% overall. That's quite sizable. And if you look at infrastructure from 5 key sectors, I take power as number 1. And this includes, obviously, generation in terms of, as well as transmission and distribution, investments required in renewable energy, investments required to do more captive power plants, such as geometric power in Aba, And you can see sometimes when there's a grid failure across the country, there's light in Aba. The gap is estimated at $17 billion just for power alone. And that is over the next 30 years for the Southeast. If you look at transport and logistics, this will include roads and bridges, rail, ports, water transportation. You're looking at a gap of nearly $14 billion over the next 30 years for the Southeast. And if you look at telecommunications, including fiber optic backbone, last mile connectivity, mobile telecom towers and fiber optic networks, and data centers, these are critical for us to move into the new economy. All this talk about artificial intelligence, remote working, they will fail woefully if we don't have telecoms infrastructure. You're looking at a gap of about $6 billion. If you look at industrial and agricultural infrastructure, and here we're referencing mechanized commercial agriculture and access facilities to those areas, storage and processing agro-complexes, agro-processing industrial zones and industrial parks, you're looking at a gap of $10 billion. And last but not the least, if you look at social infrastructure, and here I'm referencing healthcare infrastructure, educational infrastructure, as well as security infrastructure, which is critical to ensure that any investment is protected and that the human capital required to support these investments are available and nurtured and learned. You're looking at a gap of $8 billion. So in total, the Southeast has a gap of $54 billion over the next 30 years. That's a lot of money to close the gap. But collectively, we can do a whole lot. And this now leads me into the second section of my intervention, which is, what are the pathways to mobilizing long-term capital? And what are the constraints, whether real or imagined, that we are facing today? Let's look at capital from a tripartite point of view. There is public capital, government budgets, grants, financing from government-backed institutions. Like I showed you in one of my opening slides, the Southeast in 2024 received 1.1 trillion naira from the federal government, and amongst themselves raised only 300 billion naira in terms of internally generated revenue, giving a total of 1.4 trillion naira that they were able to raise from public sources. If you add grants and loans, you could estimate maybe another 200 to 300 billion. And so the expenditure from the Southeast region in 2024 would not have exceeded 1.7 trillion, just from public capital alone. We'll look at the private capital side, and this will be funding from banks, from institutional investors, from private investors, from corporates, from retail individuals like all of us in this room, and of course from our diaspora brothers and sisters around the world. And then we also look at blended capital. This is where we combine the merits of public capital with private capital in order to fund particularly long-term infrastructure projects that are required to drive the growth of this region. Now, public capital constraints to potential optimization. We clearly have seen over the years an over-dependence on revenue from the central ports from many states in Nigeria, and the Southeast is not very different. There has been, secondly, poor innovation towards crystallizing revenue potential. And I say that from the point of view of showing that the internally generated revenue of all the 5 states combined is coming out to just about a quarter of what they are receiving from the center. I dare say there is capacity for the Southeast to be able to do at least 2 times of what they are getting from the center. And so, if as a group they receive 1 trillion naira, they should be able to raise at least 2 trillion naira themselves every year to be able to move that expenditure level to 3 trillion. Again, the third point is weak economic coordination among the subnationals. I think one of the most remarkable things that happened this week was seeing the 5 Southeast governors represented in one voice for the first time in memory in this room. And all of them speaking very strongly of their intention to coordinate and collaborate to drive the development of the region. And I have to thank the Southeast Development Commission, Mark Okoye and his team, for this laudable achievement. And then last but not the least is policy inconsistency. And this is critical because if we want to drive investment into the region, we have to act as a bloc. And a simple example would be if you want to attract international manufacturing companies like Daimler-Benz to set up, or a GlaxoSmithKline to set up, many of these people will look at the laws from across the different states and expect that it's harmonized in terms of land laws or business permits. And that's one of the things that we can do ourselves to improve the potential to generate more revenue from the public side. But if you look at the IGR, and this chart is a bit busy, you can see there's huge untapped potential to increase IGR. Enugu has shown a very startling example. In 2022, the IGR in Enugu was 28.7 billion naira. In 2024, it had risen to 180 billion naira. As of 2025, based on public sources, it had reached 400 billion naira. This is unprecedented, and I must acknowledge the government of His Excellency Governor Peter Ndubuisi for this laudable achievement. But if you can do that, it means that there's huge capacity in Imo, certainly in Abia, definitely in Anambra, and so also in Obonyi, to grow their IGR. Because prior to this present government in Enugu State, anybody else would say that Enugu is a civil servant state and there's no money there. But this is the same state that is now topping 400 billion naira in IGR. So there's more, there's capacity, and we just have to show that innovation and creativity for growth. Moving on to private capital, what are the constraints? The constraints, unfortunately, when it comes to private capital, are self-imposed. It's not really anybody that's limiting any of the states from raising money from the private sector. You have basic things that the private sector requires, which is transparency and disclosure. Any entity that wants to raise money from the private sector must be willing to show that it is well governed and can produce audited accounts, can produce transparent information that is consistent across different ministries, departments, and agencies of government, must have the discipline to maintain that quality of information year on year, must have the discipline to respect the contract it enters into as a state, must have the ability to be accountable not just to its citizens, but to its stakeholders, because before you go and take money from the private sector, they want to see that you have the capacity for accountability. And any constraint here, I would say, they are really not constraints. There are things that each of the states, if they focus their minds to do it, they can resolve in short order. Because Lagos State is doing it. Last year in November, Lagos State raised 243 billion naira from the capital market in two transactions. One at 215 billion, a plain vanilla bond. The rest was a green bond. And that was taken from the same capital markets that we all are watching here in Nigeria. And that is because Lagos State is PENCOM compliant. To be PENCOM compliant means that the state has joined the defined contribution pension scheme, and all its employees are part of that scheme, and they are contributing on a monthly basis, and they have the necessary documentation to show to the pension fund industry for them to tap funding from that market. If you look at the domestic pool of capital available, and not stepping outside of Nigeria, today the debt capital market is at 70 trillion naira in value. The equity capital market, the value of the all-share index is at 100 trillion naira in value. The pension funds industry, the amount of money we have pulled in our pension fund is 27 trillion naira. And if you look at the diaspora remittances, last year, Nigeria received $23 billion, of which an estimated $4 billion came to the Southeast, mostly for consumption. This is equivalent to 6 trillion naira. That tells you the capital is not the issue. Capital is available. It is the discipline and the commitment and focus to get that capital that is lacking. And if you look at these numbers and compare that to the revenue of the states, remember, I showed you, in 2024, they collected 1.1 trillion from FAC, and they raised 300 billion amongst themselves in internally generated revenue. But compare those numbers to what you see in terms of the domestic pool of capital available. It means here we are as a region where there's money all around us, and we have decided not to go and get it. The paradox is similar to Nigeria, which is sitting on oil and gas, and we sometimes have scarcity of petroleum, and we don't have the gas to fire our industries, and we are wondering what is wrong. We have the capacity, we have the intelligence, and we have the tenacity to fix this problem, all within this room. And if you go specifically to the pension fund sector, of the 27 trillion available, about 1.3 trillion is available to state government to raise as bonds. Set aside the ones they can raise if they do structured investments through specific vehicles. Of that 1.3 trillion, only 240 billion has been taken, and that was taken by Lagos State, and you've got over $1 trillion naira waiting for investors, waiting for projects to fund. And this is part of the challenge we are seeing in terms of our capacity to mobilize capital. And lastly, let me look at blended finance. And this is a very wide subject. But I just want to use examples to illustrate this. About 16 years ago, the Azora power plant in Edo State was conceived by some creative investors. Some of them are in this room. The shareholders, the idea was to raise $900 million to build a 461 megawatt power plant, a greenfield power plant from the scratch. But in order to get the idea to move, the investors, Amaya Capital, Actis, Africa 50, and a few others needed the federal government of Nigeria to give some guarantees. And the government gave two guarantees. One is what they call a partial risk guarantee. This guarantee says, when we build this power plant, you must take the power. If you build a 461 megawatt power plant, every month we'll send you an invoice and you must pay us. We don't want to know what your problems are, you just must pay. And the government gave that guarantee. The second guarantee is what they call a put-call option agreement. And this agreement essentially says, if at any point the federal government decides to cancel the contract for the power plant, then they will have to pay the investors their entire $900 million within a specific period of time, and I think that was 20 years. So, with those guarantees in place, these investors went and mobilized over $800 million from development finance institutions, including DFC, IFC, British international investors, and at least 10 other investors, and raised the $900 million and built Azura Power, and that plant today supplies more than 10% of any power available in the country at any time, and is actually regarded as the best IPP in Nigeria, bar none. That is what blended finance can do. But it's not just international investors that do blended finance. Closer to home, our own Mofi, the MD of Mofi is here, Dr. Armstrong Takang. The DG of the SEC is here, Dr. Timi Agama. Between Mofi and SEC, they structured a blended finance to intervene in the real estate sector of Nigeria. You know, Nigeria has a claimed deficit of 28 million housing units that needs to be built. But the issue has always been, how do you find mortgages at single-digit rates, interest rates, with long tenor? You find that it's not the ability to pay, it is the cost of the money that makes it difficult for people to afford to buy homes. So if a house costs 20 million naira, for example, and you can borrow that money and pay 9% per annum for 10 years, most civil servants will be able to afford that house. But if the same house costs 20 million naira and they had to go to a commercial bank and borrow at 35%, every 2 years, they'll be owing double the amount they borrowed. So it becomes impossible for them to repay that loan. What we then did with Mofi Real Estate was to set a fund size of 1 trillion, get the federal government to subscribe in the first tranche of 150 billion at a very reduced interest income to the federal government. And then we then subsequently came to the market and raised another 100 billion from private investors at normal interest rates. So as a result, the blended financing cost available to people is now at single digits. And this is an example of intervening in the local market using the capacity we have in this room. Bear in mind, I was just saying this transaction was done within 1.5 years. And that is one organization. The total IGR of the Southeast in 2024 was 300 billion. And one organization organized 250 billion. It tells you the capacity of what is possible. So on that note, I'd like to round up my presentation by echoing a call to action for all the Southeast states, and in particular, the Southeast Development Commission. You must commit to developing region-wide feasibility plans. In addition, you must commit to setting up a project preparation funding for that. I can say, even at Mofi, we have 5 billion naira set aside for project preparation funding. And if you go around all the 5 states and raise 5 billion naira from each of them, which is not difficult to do, you have 20 billion to join with Mofi and be able to do more project preparation. Because the quality of your investment is tied to the quality of the business plan you present. You just can't wake up overnight and announce a project. You need time to study that project. Like if you're going to build a regional railway line, or if you're going to build a new power plant to serve the region, it needs time to be planned and to be developed properly. On top of that, you need to focus all on what is most important. With all the needs that we have, I must say that power is critical. We must start with power. If we can put more power, we can then power the industry, power the transport systems and the logistics that will unlock trade and agriculture and be able to unlock the high potential of the region. Thirdly, we cannot play with insecurity anymore. It is the biggest dampener to investments. If there's insecurity, no investor is coming here. The estimated amount that the Monday sit-at-home issue has caused the Southeast is running in the trillions of naira to date. And very few states have managed to come out of that shackle. Enugu, as an example, and a few others, but there's more to be done. I saw Governor Soludo a couple of weeks ago still dealing with this issue with the traders in Onitsha market. And it is very critical that we resolve insecurity because that is blocking access to capital for the entire region. Number 4 is what I call align fully with private investor rules of engagement. No longer can we continue to pretend that we can get away without auditing our accounts or without being PENCOM compliant, without doing the things that allow us to raise money from the private sector. Because private capital is running at 100 times more than what the government capital has. And just that discipline alone will open up a complete waterfall of cash and opportunity for the region. So we must align fully to that. And lastly, because we have at this moment a platform that never existed, while I recognize that it will take time for the 5 Southeast states to become compliant, the SCDC can itself start tomorrow because it's already compliant. It has enabling legislation and can lead the charge in unlocking trillions of naira of capital, both domestically and internationally, to transform the Southeast. On that note, ladies and gentlemen, I thank you very much.
Please, another round of applause for Dr. Chioke. Now you understand why I nicknamed him the name that I called him. We all know numbers don't lie, and he's painted a very clear picture for us as to the gaps with, attracting capital to our region and how to do things with accountability and transparency. Given that we have a very tight schedule, because a few of my speakers and panelists may need to catch a flight, I would now be inviting very quickly Mr. Obinna Ihedioha to come take us through his own presentation. He will be delivering a presentation titled Strengthening Domestic Revenue, Mobilization and the Fiscal Social Contract. Mr. Ihedioha, thank you.
Thank you very much. Good morning. Thank you very much, Ike. I thought that was a wonderful presentation. Most importantly, what I got out was discipline, accountability, and then focus. May I use this opportunity to thank my very own brother and friend, Mark, for inviting me being here today. I think Ike has done quite a whole lot in providing the context. I think he's done most of my presentation for me. I'm going to focus on very simple matter, which is about harmonization of tax and providing how best can we strengthen domestic revenue mobilization and the fiscal social contract. And in this regard, sorry, how do I do this? Okay. So the outline of my presentation goes as thus. So we're just going to review what domestic revenue mobilization is vis-a-vis the Southeast. I also did a lot of justice in providing some of the context around this. Then we'll look at how best do we strengthen this fiscal social contract regarding our region, as well as the central vision for 2050 with regards to how best do we deepen the capital, how best do we strengthen our resolve in financing and providing the necessary structures around how those finances can be structured and best be utilized. So quite quickly, I think the point is, so quite quickly, we just glance through this part of the presentation, which deals with revenue mobilization, domestic revenue mobilization. I think some of the slides that I presented showed us the capacity and also the inabilities from the various states. We saw clearly how some of these things can be generated and what the capacity various states and various verticals towards raising those capital can bring. So what is DRM basically? It is not just about raising taxes, it's about broadening the tax base. It is also about creating structures that helps to formalize the informal economy. We saw from the previous slides the various economic activities that do happen in various parts and various states of the southeastern states, but how best have we been able to harmonize these things? So which is what leads us to creating the structures around domestic revenue mobilization. In part, what it does drive is about sustainability and turning those economic activities into sustainable investment framework and structures. And to do that, it requires a sense of independence. It requires a sense of planning. It requires a deep sense of trust. Without independence, really, you can't actually plan. Without that planning, you can't build the trust. So the reality, and of course, what I see the SCDC doing is creating an enabling environment for these things to operate. Next slide, please. And you look at the overview of the Southeast economy, and I think I did a fantastic job again. Pardon me, I'm going to be calling him a couple of times because he's also a pathfinder in this path. But he provided a fantastic introduction into this. So my slide looks at the 2024, the Southeast were just barely lagging behind the Southwest and the South-South in terms of IGR. And we also saw from that previous slide that he did about Enugu State generating 181 billion. And when you look at Enugu vis-a-vis other southeastern states, you find out that they may have been economically or commercially disadvantaged, but what is shown is the discipline upon which they have thrived to develop their IGR. So coming from something around 200 to where they are, so I mean about 27 billion to where they are at 181 billion shows you that the commitment and leadership actually helps to drive or to provide domestic revenue mobilization. My next slide, we're talking about how best do we strengthen domestic revenue mobilization. On the one end is broadening the tax base. And this is about how do we assemble the small and medium scale enterprises into the tax base. The good thing with the harmonization of the new tax laws and the kickoff of the new tax administration in January, there's been a lot of formalization into how best taxes can be harmonized, how best it can provide the basis upon which growth and domestic revenue mobilization can be harnessed. And of course, digitization of the revenue system. I understand and I knew quite well firsthand when a sense of discipline is provided within a state. Enugu has done that, Anambra has done that, Abia has done that, Imo did that in the past, But what it shows is that once it's digitized, it removes a sense of arbitrariness, it removes a sense of opaqueness, and provides a platform through which revenues can now be harnessed for the greater good, for the social contract that is being established. Of course, rationalization and exemption of various incentives. There are new businesses through which SEDC can actually drive some of those incentives that will help to mobilize local capital. Institutional capacity and governance, and I think that is why it's very necessary. A couple of weeks ago, Mark and I have been talking about how he's gotten his executive directors and his team in helping to create a very strong ecosystem that drives accountability, capacity, and of course innovation towards how best these structures can be done. And of course, most of you would know, or most of you may not know, that the Southeast Development Commission hasn't actually received their allocation. But what they've done with the little resources they've had is to build the capacity, to deepen their resolve in driving structured investment policies. When we look at the fiscal social contract, I think I provided a virtuous cycle, which is about government accountability, which is about visible service delivery and increased tax compliance. When government provides a sense of direction and accountability, they build trust. By doing this, the first thing I think the government should do, and the regional government or state government, is to provide some sense of accountability, transparency, through which citizens can then believe to think that they have a hand in planning and driving the revenue mobilization structures. With this, you see infrastructure project. There's visibility around healthcare improvement, education, and digital public service. I talked about it as well. And you look at the increased tax compliance, because when it goes this cycle, what it then now does is broaden the tax base, it lowers enforcement costs, and provides sustainable revenue. When we move further a bit, we see how best do we strengthen the fiscal social contract. There's been a lot of lack of trust. There's also been a lot of apprehension. But when these two things meet together, it provides a lackadaisical approach towards how best this can be driven. So what is our reality today? In the southeastern region, we know that entrepreneurship and trading activities drive most of our economic activities. There's also a very high sense of reliance in investment. Everybody, most of us are entrepreneurs, traders. A few of us, work on the other part, but then you still have a couple of things that you do informally. What this then now does is there's a whole low trust in government, whereby the individuals and communities provide security for themselves, provide basic amenities, education, healthcare, and all of that. So they decide that how best would they be paying taxes if those taxes are not best utilized. And then you look at, that leads to a poor tax transparency, because nobody likes to pay tax. Everybody wants to figure out how best do I circumvent this process and still benefit from what it is. And then there's a weak service linkage. That is the reality we have today. But then, what does that do? It weakens our trust. Of course, with a high informal sector, businesses are run outside the tax net. Then that makes it difficult for you to mobilize the necessary revenue domestically. Low compliance, there's an incentive for them not to comply. Private solutions, because communities now go into various ways. I remember in my younger days, my dad used to tell me a story of how they contributed money to build the Imo airport. Now that sense of responsibility, on the one hand is good, and on the other hand, also has a challenge where they feel that they don't have any responsibility towards what government is doing. But then therein lies the opportunity. The opportunity is for government to commit to a fair and transparent tax administration system. This will drive local service delivery. And of course, citizens would ensure that they voluntarily comply towards tax. Dividends of compliance would then now provide social welfare and benefit. But why does it matter so much? Sorry, go back to the last slide. Why does it matter so much? What it does, we saw the numbers that Ike showed because of the IGR. Because once there's compliance, once there's transparency, once there's accountability, and there's discipline, the IGR would grow. We've seen that from Enugu rising from 27 billion to 181 billion. It's not a wish. It was disciplined contribution. It was sense of governance. It was clarity of purpose. And what they then see is improved infrastructure. It was beautiful driving in yesterday night and looking at the roads. My colleague was telling me, is that how this place is? I said, wait until you get into the city. And you look at it and you find out that there's improved investors' confidence. I would like to come in and invest. This helps to drive and attract the right investment opportunities. And what it then now do is to ensure long-term planning for infrastructure investment. And if you look at the financial ecosystem, why does it matter for Vision 2050? What it does then do, it requires a sustained investment in infrastructure, human capital, governance system, social services over the long-term horizon. You know, when you look at the Southeast Development Commission, capital goes where there's trust. It goes where there's clarity. It goes where there's structure. I can opt to invest because I know Mark, my very good friend, has very structured discipline towards investment. My uncle Toby has, over the years, shown discipline and commitment towards how he does these things. My uncle Cliff Ogbede also has shown and demonstrated that. So I can go that. I can do that from a personal perspective. I could do that from my organization. But what it then does showcase, when you have this group of people inside and in one particular commission, it then now drives confidence, and confidence drives investment. So gentlemen and ladies, the Vision 2050 requires long-term delivery beyond political cycles. It's not just about APC, it's not about PDP, it's not about any of these institutions that don't matter. What matters is governance. And capital doesn't look at politics. Capital looks at returns. And where those returns are, that is where they're going to be driving their investment. You look at financing determines whether priorities move from plans to projects. And Mike and I have been discussing this over the last 1 year. How best do we mobilize this associated capital? I talked about blended finance. I think I'm going to touch a little bit on that later on. The scale of infrastructure and system investments in capital-intensive projects. I did mention about logistics and road. If you look at our collective road networks, the interconnectivities, they do exist. But when you look at intra-regional trade in the Southeast, it runs between 4 to 6%. This is absolutely abysmal. If you look at intra-African trade, it runs anything between 13 and 14%. You look at intra-European trade, 67 to 72%. And when you look at the intra-European trade, these are just states, really. Some of them are smaller than Anambra, some of them are smaller than Enugu, but then their trade within themselves runs between 67 and 70%. This goes to show that we can do a lot of things together. When you look at Anambra, look at Aba, look at Enugu, the contiguous trading system and businesses, they don't exist harmoniously. The Anambra man or the Enugu, or the Imo man or the Abia man rather would find a way to fly to Lagos to go and sell his goods and properties, and then Enugu suffers. How best do we harness those strengths and opportunities within ourselves? Mobilizing private capital development. Capital depends on credible public financing signals. And I think Southeast Development Commission has shown that signal. And I think what we need to do now, how do we deepen that resolve to make sure there's sustained growth and being able to attract the right investments into this space. Next slide, please. Priority areas. And I think we all know what they are: transport, health, human capital. But I think I'm going to touch and focus on only one, which is energy. Power is the highway upon which all infrastructure development ply. I talked about geometrics. I've been fortunate enough to work on that transaction for many years. Mr. Toby, you know very well how we worked on that. Mark, you know quite well how we worked on that. But how best do we strengthen and expand the opportunities that lies within geometrics? How do we use this to develop our state? How do we use this to develop our region? It can only be done through associations like the Southeast Development Corporation and Commission, strengthening that and expanding the potential opportunities to drive and attract capital. Then that is very, very important. Without power, it will be difficult for us to continue to develop as a people as a region. Next slide. Financing framework for Vision 2050. 2050 will become a reality when there are clear plans, when there are clear structures around driving that dream. Now is a dream, but I believe it can be a reality. It can be a reality because we'll identify the funding sources, where the money comes from. Ike talked about institutional investors, private capital, public capital. And we can find these within the subnationals. We can find these through private institutions. Mark and I have been talking about where I used to work before the Nigeria Sovereign Investment Authority. We looked at opportunity where we create capital for expanding and supporting sub-regional government. And we started to look at this where we would provide capital for project preparation. We've done this myself and InfraCredit, and we've done this in various blended approaches and structures to enable opportunities and infrastructure investments to come in. So this is where I see that those funding sources would come. Like I said, capital will go where there's opportunities and where there's clarity. And I think the signal is being set through events such as this, through commissions such as the SEDC. Domestic revenue as an anchor, because you put your hand where your mouth is or something like that. But then, because we're from the Southeast, we need to look at how best do we demonstrate for others to follow. So broadening the revenue base and formalization will strengthen the state and local revenue institutions to create discipline, really. Again, not to oversing it, Enugu created a strong discipline, which is why you see the rise and which is why you've seen the growth. And we've seen various or similar growth in various other parts of the nation. Digital and data-driven revenue system, capital mobilization and risk-sharing mechanism. Again, when you create a blended finance structure, it provides discipline around it. It helps to look at what are the risk matrices. How best do we allocate the risk? Credit risk, investment risk, infrastructure risk, operational risk. All of these things are looked in very critically. And which is why I talked about the project preparation facility. We created one, or rather we created two project preparation facilities, one with AFRESIM. I know that SCDC has been talking to AFRESIM in developing a project preparatory facility. And I think where I used to work, we have been having conversations around how best do we now deepen that pause to create various silos, sector by sector, and focusing on how best those project preparatory facilities can be deepened to be able to attract long-term capitals. And institutional sustainability. So aligning with Southeast Vision 2050, steering technical structures, which I know the committee, the commission is doing. But the issue around that is security. Insecurity is a major downer towards what we'll achieve as a people. And the reality for us is how best do we ensure that insecurity doesn't hamper the growth and development of the Southeast. And I think that is one of the key things that I've seen from this retreat in the last couple of days. I think there's a commitment, there's a demonstration that some of those key teaching issues that provide the elixir for investment to happen are being addressed. Next slide. I would rather leave this aspect because I think I've touched on that before. Let's go to the next one, please. And partnership and the role of SCDC. And I think I said it before. The key partnership, it lies in the demonstration that we've seen. So the Southeast Development Commission will serve as a regional investment partner of choice. And I think by the time they create and put themselves in a structured way that they have done, they will be able to attract the right partners, attract sovereign wealth institutions, attract the likes of MOFI. For Armstrong to be here, Ike to be here, InfraCredit to be here, shows you clearly that there is a demonstration, there's a path in the right direction. So that partnership is very much required. SEC is here. I know very well that all these gentlemen and women here are absolutely busy. They've been busy doing different things, but being here shows and signals a commitment to come in, to help to develop, to help to provide long-term capital, and to help to invest. And how do we then develop bankable projects? Again, I would not overemphasize it. Capital will go where there are bankability of projects. And how best do we provide bankable projects? Is to provide proper project development and project preparations for those projects. Because it's not about wishing, it's about deepening the resolve to invest in those long-term infrastructure. It's not a wish, it's a reality. And then data for market intelligence. One of the things all of us know here is the development institutions, the donor partners, and investors like data. And data cannot be hidden as far as it's fact-checked. And this data is where donor funding, diaspora investment institutions will want to anchor their plans, want to anchor their modules to be able to plan ahead and invest appropriately. Next slide, please. So again, in conclusion, Vision 2050 must be financed. That is clear. Not to be hoped for. And to be financed, capital must flow. There must be stability in our region. There must be clarity. The opportunity does exist. A renewed fiscal social contract will unlock trust and growth. And of course, strategic capital mobilization, partnership, engagement to power long-term success. And it's on this note that I end my presentation, but I think the central part of this is discipline. Discipline as to how we plan. Discipline as to how we attract the key people. Discipline and accountability as to how we use the resources. Thank you very much, and good morning.
Thank you so much, Obinna Ihedioha. You will all agree with me that both presenters have provided us with the data on how to move the southeastern region from where it is now and where it ought to be. Capital looks at reforms, not politics. Once there's accountability, discipline, clarity of purpose, then investments will flow. I think the poster child of growth we've heard this morning is Enugu State. And I believe during the course of the past few days, we've heard about collaboration amongst all the states in the southeast region, and not competition. So I think it's out now for the remaining 4 states to speak with the guys in Enugu State to see how they're able to, create this magic, which Dr. Chioke clearly showed us during his own presentation. We will now be moving very quickly into the panel session itself. And I've curated some very key questions for my panelists. And I have said to them today that our goal is very simple. We don't want platitudes. We don't want nice speeches. We want to see clear pathways on how to grow the region. We want everyone living and listening to us to walk away today with a clear understanding of how the Southeast, through the SCDC, can move from potential to project ready, credit worthy, and investment attractive. So I have like a few buckets of questions. And during the course of the conversation, you would understand how each bucket kind of lies or relates to the next one. So the first set of questions will speak to the blueprints and institutional readiness. We're trying to establish the soft infrastructure here, data, systems, policy. And my first question will be going to Mr. Mueller. Thank you for joining us. And we will want you to, tell us from your own vantage point, what is the biggest institutional red flag that would prevent an infrastructural project in the Southeast from being considered for an infra credit guarantee? We understand you see it where projects meet capital. So please let us know what these red flags are that could actually create a bottleneck from the investments coming in and from infra credit standing behind those projects?
Okay, thank you. And it's a pleasure to be here and a privilege. Thank you to the Southeast Development Commission for organizing the 4-day summit. Again, I'm the Executive Director and Chief Operating Officer of Infrastructure Credit Guarantee Company here in Nigeria. We guarantee long-term local currency debt for infrastructure projects up to 20-year tenor, crowding in largely Nigerian pension money into the real sector. The single biggest constraint for most infrastructure projects is the lack of operational expertise. We have a lot of companies in the market who have constructed assets. Maybe they've done a pipeline construction on an engineering, procurement, and construction basis, but they've not operated it. And that is really the single biggest constraint for most businesses. If you think about it, nobody was doing liquefied natural gas for the domestic market until about 5-6 years ago. A company just west of Port Harcourt, Greenville, started. And so when you're looking for success stories in the market, very few credit institutions want to be, the first to back a new player to operate a new asset. So that experience, having operated similar assets in this market, is again the single biggest challenge. Where the projects are coming from the public sector, the same matter arises. Even if the public sector tries to do this on a PPP basis and they have a winning bidder, or they say we've contracted it well, we're still going to look at has that company operated that asset? Something like a toll road, we know sort of universally toll roads rarely are able to be bankable on their own. They're creating value along an economic corridor. There's land that is becoming valuable because of improved transportation infrastructure. And the same goes for a lot of rail projects. So for rail and road projects, again, how many companies have operated a toll road in Nigeria? How many private companies have operated a rail line in Nigeria? It's very rare. It's usually been government owned and operated. Where we want to back those private sector companies on a 20-year debt instrument, fixed rate, risk-free for the pension funds because we'll take the credit risk. But those assets, we have to be confident that they can be managed over the long term. I'll give one last example here. In the power space, those that are familiar with the power sector privatization and the reforms, a lot of times the distribution companies will speak in terms of we're reducing losses. All I need to do is improve my collections, improve my collections, improve my collections. And that usually is not the sort of operational mindset that we want to hear for a successful business. Really, collections should be easy if everyone is metered and if you're doing your job of energy audits within your own network. It's actually the customer service that leads to happy customers paying their bills. If you're not on top of your network, if you don't know where your power is going, if you can't demonstrate that you're doing your own sort of energy audits and catching theft in a timely manner, then you're not really successfully doing the operation. If you are ensuring that your network is always running, if you are the one telling the customer, sorry, we're about to have an outage, as opposed to, as most of us know, we're the ones that will be calling the local substation operator to say, hey, our line is down. As customers, that's not how one would expect a business to operate. So that operational expertise is the single biggest challenge for most infrastructure projects. Thank you.
You can clap, actually. Thank you so much, Mr. Mueller. And we're hearing him loud and clear. So we're moving from theory to practicals. It's interesting to hear that a region where we know that most of us are extremely cerebral, we have not moved from textbook to actually doing. That's what he's saying is preventing, companies like InfraCredit standing behind your project. So we have a lot of people moving around with briefcases that haven't done any of these projects before. And so this is a charge to everyone listening in the southeastern region that have the capacity to do this, that you have to start small and build your track over time to be able to give investors and companies like InfoCredit the confidence to actually partner with you. So we need to start doing things differently. I'm now going to move very quickly to Dr. Chioke. And you've spoken about capital flowing where there's accountability and transparency. If the Southeastern governors were sitting here today, and they come and they say, and we've heard over the past few days about, different projects that we should be looking at, and they're thinking of the rail project, for instance, what would you say would be the first structural weakness to committing capital to such a project for the region?
Thank you. Actually would lead on Daniel's point. I believe that if the governors come together to build an intra-regional rail line, that has the capacity to open up a lot of trade and commerce and even agriculture and industry, because it will be able to move goods and services more efficiently. But the challenge will be that if you look at Nigeria, there's no single entity I can point to that has the experience and track record of running a rail line. Building it is easy. If you have a good feasibility plan, as you can tell from my presentation, and the people in this room, you can certainly raise the funding to build it. A Julius Berger can just drop network of rail lines in a matter of 2 years. But it is running it that is critical. And what I've also seen over the years is how sometimes we build without understanding how to run it. And it's actually the way you would have designed it would have been to find the operator first. And the operator would have told you, this is what the demographics of your region and the level of development of your region would suggest that we should do. And therefore, you then redesign to fit the market, and therefore it can then grow more organically. So my biggest concern will be who is the operator and what is the commitment we have that this operator will be around to run the train line. Thank you very much.
Dr. Chioke, interestingly, as you were speaking, I was smiling, because one thing we know about the Igbo people is we want to be the owner and the operator of our businesses, Emeka and Sons, and the sons are in line to take over the business. Maybe from my experience as a lawyer, I can say clearly that sometimes you need to be able to distinguish ownership from operatorship, and to get us to where we need to be, we need to look for seasoned operators to come whilst you hold on to the ownership of the business. And when you have a seasoned operator coming on board, you have people that can understudy them, so that in a few short years, you can actually hold your head up and say, I am owner-operator of this. But you can't, signal to the world that you are owner and operator when you actually haven't done any of this. So we're listening to the things that are going to, stand in the line of achieving Vision 2050. And we don't want that to happen. So I'm now going to segue now very quickly to Dr. Agama. And we're looking at regulatory systems and market standards. What would you say needs to be done to convert Vision 2050 to a bankable instrument that investors can trust, price, and scale?
Well, thank you very much for having me, and congratulations, Mark, for this very important discussion that is going on here. As a regulator, what is important for me, actually, is what is the environment that allows you to operate very efficiently, that attracts investors and investment. That's fundamental. Because if you do not have a strong foundation, you certainly cannot build on it. That foundation requires certain things to be done. Without them being done, forget about whatever plan you have as an institution. And that is critical, because one of the things that the Southeast has actually not been able to put together easily is patience. Patience. Looking at it from every angle, we are always in a hurry. And in being in that state, it has taken us nowhere. So clearly, first and foremost, we must step back and ask ourselves the question, how far have we gone with our rush? So, creating a bankable project requires some level of dexterity and due diligence. And that is critical in making sure that people are actually interested in what you do. And what does that drive you into? Disclosure. As the SEC and as the regulator of the capital market, disclosure is key and primary. In fact, as it is today, currently securities regulation the world over actually rely on a disclosure regime rather than a merit regime. And what does it mean? In simple parlance, he said, tell me who you are, how you are, and what you intend to do, and give me the opportunity and the leverage to accept or not to accept. That's what it means. And you imagine what that does. It brings trust. And once there is trust, there's going to be flow of capital. Once there is suspicion, everybody will run away. So clearly the first thing you must put at the back of your mind, which is also a challenge for us from the East, everybody wants to hide something, right? Not wanting the other person to know. Because of competition, it's okay to compete. But you must compete constructively that will attract other people to be part of your business. So this, for me, is the very first thing to do. Then, of course, technical feasibility. Cannot be wishy-washy. You can't afford it. For everybody that wants to look at what you're doing, they want to see that you have the competence, right? One of the acclaimed principles of the Southeast region is the one boy principle, which is widely acclaimed even in Harvard. What does the one boy principle mean? It means technical proficiency. But that technical proficiency needs to be fine-tuned to a finish line. The challenge is that fine-tuning to a finish line is never there, because even the one boy is too much in a hurry to exit. So at the time he gets out, he's really not completely refined. In his mindset, he has arrived, yet he's not there yet. And so when he comes out to him as being excellent. But to the external eye, that will be the investor, is looking, well, you have tried, but you've not gotten there yet. This is critical for us as we move forward. And we've spoken about capital. Capital has been fungible. Capital moving to where it is needed. Capital to moving to where, you want it to be. But for it to move to that place, there must be a sense. I usually say, there is no way that you have honey somewhere that the ants will not be manufactured. The ants will go to where the honey is. And where is the honey? In the Southeast region. The strength and the value that we have in this space must be utilized to meet what we want. The combination and the joint nature of the Eastern region is a comparative advantage that we must build on into providing a strength that cannot be toyed with. But do we do that? We always want to work in isolation. It's been mentioned here. Promoter, founder, managing director, chief executive, owner, and whatever. We want very long names. To do what? Nothing. long names do not drive capital. They don't drive. What drives capital is value. So it's important for me as a regulator. What does my stamp do to what you want to do? My stamp brings credibility. My stamp brings transparency. My stamp draws cash. I am actually the honey that every ant will want to find.
Now we know why you are the best person to be wearing that red cap, because the proverbs that you've been dropping are second to none. Now moving very quickly to Dr. Takang. We've heard whilst Dr. Chioke was giving his presentation about the great things that Murphy continues to do. And we're asking, as persons in the southeastern region, how would you tell the world, for us, that the southeastern states are ready for investments? What is the signpost that you need to see in the southeastern region to, let everyone know that we're actually ready for that flow of capital?
Thank you very much. First of all, let me start and lend my voice to the commendations for Mark and his team at the SCDC. I'm really glad that we're taking a bold step, because I do remember when the whole concept of SCDC was mooted and then it was passed at the National Assembly. Can you hear me? And for me, the first thing I said to the Deputy Speaker then was that we have to distinguish how SEDC is going to be set up and operated. And we have to make a distinction between the SEDC as a government organization and the investment arm of it, because that is what would distinguish it from the rest of it. And I'm glad that you moved ahead to establish an investment company, because that is the first start to signal to the world that the region is ready for investment. The second thing that I like to state here is that from our own experience, and in addition to what Dr. Chioke said about MRIF, is there are many others. And we, by virtue of what we do as the manager of federal government investments, the number of things we see in the marketplace. That distinction between the structure that owns the assets and the operator. I know you spoke about it, but let me speak about it from an experiential standpoint. You spoke about it as a lawyer. Let me speak about it as an operator, someone in the marketplace. It is a point that I think needs to be driven home, because it's going to affect a lot of the decisions that are going to be made and the attractiveness of it. And it's even more so because we are dealing with 5 states in the region who have not had a good history of working together towards a common goal. So the distinction between the asset owner and the asset operator becomes even more relevant in this case. And this message is really for SCDC. Because you're going to find, for any of these projects to make sense, you're going to need to transcend the states, whether it is a rail network, a road network, a transmission line for electricity, any bankable project, for it to make market sense and be attractive to investors, there has to be scale, there has to be size. And that by virtue of that region being small geographically, means that for it to make sense and be bankable, you have to transcend different states. Now comes the point of distinguishing between that asset that is owned by different shareholders and stakeholders being different from the operator. So the first thing that I think that SCDC needs to do is that one of the main principles of making bankable projects is to first of all establish an SPV that owns the asset and determine the shareholders of that asset, what their shareholding is, and by virtue of how much investment they are making, whether it is cash or non-cash investments. The second is to go through a proper process to identify who the operator will be with no sentiments, no political considerations, purely on the basis of competence and ensuring that you have a contract with the operator that has an incentive for performance, but also has clear contractual terms for terminating the contract if the person is not performing, regardless of who their sponsor is. Now, we've seen that in the case of MRIF, right? We are the biggest shareholder in that instrument, but we're not the operator. We're an investor in that. We subjected ourselves to the same standards that anybody else will to the SEC. And we have our investment in the MRIF, and it's on our balance sheet. And we get dividends paid to us like every other investor. And we don't interfere in the processes as to how that investment is run. And we have seen a marked difference between that approach and the approach in the past where federal government is both the owner and the operator. And when we see that, a lot of the times that investment underperforms. So for me, if there's one message that I should give to SEDC today, is making sure that you have that distinction between the owner and the operator. And the owner needs to be very clear as to what your investment objectives are and your expectations, and hold the operator responsible for delivering to that. And when they don't, fire them. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Takang. It is clear that corporate governance is something that we cannot afford to play with if we want to signpost that we're ready for investments. We're hearing key buzzwords here today: accountability, transparency, corporate governance, your ability to show that you have a track record of doing this businesses or running these facilities, successfully. So these are things that we believe that if they're representatives of the states that make up the region in the room, I hope that they're listening and they're taking notes very, very carefully. Now, moving to Mr. Ejolu, you have often emphasized that money follows systems. You work with the UNDP. What is that one piece of data or transparency measure that you believe the Southeastern governors listening to us today should put in place to improve their governance score in the eyes of international investors?
Great, thank you very much. I'm very happy to be in the Southeast, in Enugu specifically. We are proud of you, Mark, and the distinguished board at the Southeast Development Corporation. From the first time we met, we were sold on the vision for the Southeast. And what really struck us is we were talking beyond vision. The lens that was translating this vision was a lens about how we actually build a financing or investment infrastructure or framework that will make this vision investable. So this conversation today is very important. I know you've asked about data, but I thought that I could just highlight very briefly a few things around the systems we need to think about as we work towards institutional readiness. Because, this is a very big ambition. There's a lot we can achieve, but moving towards a serious developmental state, an entrepreneurial state, is not going to be very easy if we don't build a very systematic and consistent, intense approach around how we work towards the pipeline, how we work towards protection, and how we build predictability. I would like to say that, and this has been said by most of the presenters, capital is not necessarily the issue. It is this pipeline we are looking for, but we have important system gaps, very important system gaps when it comes to project preparation, unpriced risk, fragmented rules, or you call them policy inconsistencies. What is the environment that we want to drive competitiveness? We need to be able to look at this, and how do we build this unified market, in this region? These are crucial issues we need to look at. So it's pleasing to hear that SEDC is already moving fast. through the conversations with AfriExim on a facility around project preparation. But I think we should be thinking as well about transaction and how we facilitate that whole process, the feasibilities, the PPPs, the ESG compliance, the financial modeling, etc. The examples from which we can draw, I won't go into that, but talking about protection, we need to think about how we manage risk and how we do the de-risking. I think this is going to be very, very, very important as well in creating the protection we need to actually see private capital come in. So who is going to deal with the political and governance type of risks? And that's why it becomes very important for us to think about how we crowd in financing from the DFIs, from the development organizations like our own, and how we target this in a way that actually gives us the bankability we need. Now, in terms of predictability, I think there's going to be a lot of work, and you stressed it when you talked about getting the 5 states to work as a unit. What level of deregulation needs to happen? What kind of regulatory reform should we be pushing? How do we work towards harmonizing, PPP rules, etc.? There's quite a lot of work we can do in that space. But on the data side of things, I think we should take advantage of technology and work towards, and this can happen in the next 100 days or even less. We need to build a live public investment dashboard. There are already pipelines. Listening to the governors speak, there are pipelines. And some projects have been ready for a while. But the effort to actually close on financing is what needs to happen. But how is that going to happen when we are not drawing in the interests? We should get capital out there to sense what these opportunities might be and trigger a process that actually works towards financial closure. So I think we need to take advantage of technology and go live with a very, very credible public investment dashboard that provides a significant amount of information on some of the projects we hear about, but we'll be happy to get more sense about what is in there. So I'll leave it at that, but very good conversation.
Thank you so much. Being mindful of time, I think we're going to go very quickly to the next section, next set of questions. And I'm going to start with the other lady on the panel, Ms. Okoli. We know that, and we heard when Dr. Choke was giving his presentation about the remittances from diaspora. How would you help us determine how to unlock these trillions held by the Igbo community in the diaspora to help with, providing the capital for this long-term regional infrastructure that we're looking and planning towards setting up in the region?
Thank you. So first, I want to clarify something. I'm a co-founder of UIU. So Umiwe Unite was founded by 8 professionals 22 years ago, just because we saw that need, right? And we're all professionals. We all have our day jobs. We have 2 doctors, 2 pharmacists, 2 engineers. There's a bunch of, we're all experts in our fields. But we felt like UIU was a necessary tool for us to congregate, create community and develop ourselves professionally in a foreign land. So one thing that we have realized by the way UIU has grown over the years with 14 different chapters and growing, everybody wants to be attached to home. We want to be home, whether we're going to be here full-time, whether we want to be here to visit. We have friends that want to visit. However, due to insecurity, it hasn't been made possible, right? So what we are asking for, what we would need is security. They're just, I think, going back to basics. We need running water everywhere. We need electricity everywhere. Because when you say that in the diaspora, it's like, what do you mean you guys don't have running water everywhere, right? Because we've seen it work. And it's just very disheartening, right? Because we know it should be an easy fix. We see how it works everywhere else. Even if we don't know how it works, we can ask them to help us, right? But the reason why UIU, in my opinion, has been thriving is that we're not looking at states individually. We're working together. We're united. It's not Anambra. It's not Imo. It's unite. Umibo, unite. Igbo children, unite. And together we can be great. We can do anything that we put our minds to. So as far as how we can bring our money back, we just have to have that structure. We have to have that transparency. We have to have that dashboard that has the metrics. We have to create a platform, which I know SEDC is very open to, but create that dashboard that says, we're working on this project. Yes, our vision is 2050, but here are the short-term goals that's gonna get us to 2050. Because when you say 2050, you're like, okay, here we go again, we're talking. We want less talking, we want more action.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ms. Okoli. And it's actually disheartening that in 2026, we're still speaking about no water or no power. It's actually quite sad, and this is not just speaking about the people of the Southeast, but the entire Nigeria, that we're very cerebral. We do great when we leave this jurisdiction, yet we have not been able to fix our own problem. So I think we need to be able to do things differently, at least with the Southeastern region and what the SCDC is putting together to actually signpost to Umu-Igbo outside that we are actually ready for these remittances to come in. The numbers I heard this morning were actually quite alarming in a good way. To think that the monies coming from our brothers and sisters outside of here far outstrips the internally generated revenue of the states together. So imagine what that amount of capital will do with putting the right infrastructure in place. I believe that all of us here, I don't know how many of us will be here in 2050, but we shouldn't be talking about this. In actual fact, we shouldn't be listening to any governor coming to tell us in their manifesto that they are going to give us power or water. We need to be discussing more important things. I was quite happy viewing the video that was put together by the SCDC team, and just seeing the whole techie thing of how the Southeastern region can look in a few short years should actually give us the drive to do things better. Now, moving on to Mr. Mueller, we know about, and we've kind of spoken about the different risks in our region: political risk, revenue risk, governance risk, policy risk. Which is the hardest to de-risk for Nigerian infrastructure projects?
Thank you. Of all the risks for infrastructure, really the political risk is the single most difficult because it manifests in many different forms. It might be that you need a right-of-way and you think you have the right-of-way agreed with the governor and his team, but someone in the local government now says that, no, we didn't give you right-of-way. It may be that people have to be resettled, and it is the government's obligation to actually resettle some people. Maybe there are residents that have to be moved off of a transmission line path, or there are farmers who need to be compensated for their fields being taken. And you can have a signed agreement that says the government will actually compensate these people. You've done all the work, but if the government doesn't pay, what are you going to do as the private sector company trying to build that asset if the parties have not actually been compensated? It comes up once an asset is operational. We saw this with the Lekki Toll Road. I always use this example for those that live in Lagos. A saloon car, when the Lekki Toll Road started, it cost you 120 naira to pass the toll. 7 years later, the toll price was the same. Now, any investor or credit institution will know that was not the plan. The plan was not that they would keep the toll price fixed for 7 years. There had to be something else going on. And again, it was the political risk that if they actually abide by the agreement and move the toll price by inflation every year, the residents will push back. It becomes a political challenge. We see the same thing in other transportation infrastructure where a governor will announce that the bus fare is half price today or even free. And again, as a private sector operator, you really can't be running that risk that your commercial framework is somehow changed. So political risk is the single biggest risk. We do have successes though. The port space, those are largely 20-year concessions, and I don't recall any being revoked early unless it was due to bad performance by the operator. The hydropower plants in Niger State at Shiroro, Jeba, and Kenji, all of those are long-term concessions, 35-year concessions. So again, these companies are running the risk that the concession could be terminated by a new government that comes into power. But those agreements have been structured well enough, and the monitoring of the performance is structured well enough, and the incentives are aligned that they're paying concession fees back to the government based on performance. So there are examples where one can mitigate these risks in our market, but when you get it wrong, you really can't move a project forward at all. So political risk is the single biggest challenge to structure around. Thank you.
So much, Mr. Miller. And Dr. Gama, I'm coming straight to you now. You regulate an ecosystem that turns projects into investable securities. What would you say the new instruments or frameworks or market mechanisms we should put in place to allow pension funds and insurance companies safely deploy long-term capital into our region?
Right. Thank you once again. It's a no-brainer, rather, really, as to exactly what we need to put in place. What we need to put in place is perfect information. Perfect information in the sense that it is only information that drives investment that attracts investment. So disclosure, transparency, accountability, and making sure that everyone is clear as to exactly what we want to achieve. And that transparency is important because it removes suspicion. What drives investors away is not being able to articulate exactly where the journey starts and where it will end. For every investor, investing alone is not the issue. What is the issue is how do I exit? So you can't invest in an instrument and remain there forever. No, that's not how to go about it. So clearly, it is very, very important that for us to have pension funds investing, one of them is transparency. But beyond that transparency is the stamp of the SEC, whether you like it or not. My dear brother and boss, Dr. Tekang, will tell you that the value of the Murphy Real Estate Investment Trust is clearly the way it is because of the collaboration and cooperation between the SEC and a government entity, making sure that people appreciate the transparency in that project. That is why you can raise that kind of capital in the very short time that you can raise it. But beyond raising the capital, the benefits, the incremental benefits in that structure or that instrument as we speak today has never happened in this country. So for the Southeast Development Commission, fortunately for them, they adulterated the SEC's name by including a D. If you remove the D from that name, it becomes SEC, right? So it means that you must work with SEC. You must work with SEC to provide transparent instruments that meets the requirement of public listing and public fund attraction. There are no two ways about it. You cannot get it from the window. No, you must come through the straight door. Getting everybody to understand exactly what you want to do. But the more benefit in it is that united we stand, divided we fall. The Southeast states must be united. There must be a chain that links every Southeast state together with a common purpose, and that purpose is shared prosperity.
I don't know whether we should end the session now, but we will continue. Thank you so much, sir. I'm going to now then move to Mr. Ejolu. We know that, the world over, there's now a lot of talk about climate-aligned capital for sustainable development. International development finance is shifting towards this climate-aligned and SDG-linked instruments. How would you advise the Southeast to position its priorities to access these emerging pools of green capital? And what trade-offs or conditionalities should the region be prepared to navigate?
Green finance, right? Thank you very much. I'm not an expert in green finance, but it's something that we can't run away from because it's a great opportunity out there that we need to leverage. So green finance is not really charity. It's cheaper capital, but that comes with conditions, like you said. And the Southeast can access these pools of climate-aligned capital if it frames its priorities in investable green platforms. So we can think about industrial clean energy systems. We could think about climate-resilient logistic corridors. And we could also think about sustainable industrial parks. But we need to have a caveat here, because most of the advanced economies that managed to transition actually polluted this world, and they continue to pollute to some extent, although with technological advancements, these problems are being sort of managed. So we have to be thinking about the energy mix and how we always get that balance right, because we have to be strategic in looking at how we work with the opportunities we have. But we have real opportunities with green finance, and we've seen this work in different places. If you take Morocco's NUA Solar, for instance, combined concessional climate finance with private capital to deliver large-scale renewables. We've seen Rwanda's Green City. It unlocked climate finance funds by meeting strong ESG standards. Now, ESG is very crucial. It's really about the due diligence we need to do to be compliant on environment, social safeguards, governance, etc. So the trade-off is going to be discipline, because this green capital is going to come with stronger safeguards, transparency, data reporting, and the ESG compliance. So I think we have an opportunity there. We can have a conversation, and it's good to see that the SCDC is very future smart. If you look at some of the plans of the SCDC, they're actually thinking about creating departments or units that are going to be cracking these issues. UNDP will be partnering with them on these more technical aspects, and we have opportunities to get this green financing. This region is very much bankable, but we'll need to build this facility that does this readiness with an eye also on the green finance that's out there. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Some of us in the room yesterday heard DK Chukwumerije say that he doesn't speak to the older generation anymore. He's now focused on the younger generation, so we're looking to the future. So Ms. Okoli, there's a rising trend of impact investing among young diasporans. Is there an appetite in your network for green or sustainable investment back home? And what kinds of platforms do you think they would want to see to be able to facilitate this?
There's definitely appetite for green sustainability projects. So I know through our UIU Cares Foundation, we have, our goal is to reduce poverty. That's something that we want to do, is work with the community, because that's where the need is, right? We see, like, we have family members, we have come from different communities where people don't have the basics, so we try to close that gap, and that's very important to us. We have what it takes to help, so we're doing that the best way we can with what we have. But if we do it collectively, we can do a lot more. Your question is what platforms do we need to see? So I think we need to create that dashboard that has, we have to create clear metrics and keep it simple, right? So that anybody can understand what it is that our goal is. So create clear metrics that we can follow through on and provide constant updates so that we know how we're trending. That's going to add a lot of value to how the diaspora sees the work that we're doing through SEDC.
Thank you so much for that. We have spoken we've mentioned during the course of our session today about the 5 states working together. And we now need to look at how do we want to create that picture of one bankable regional economic bloc. And how do we plan for these 5 states to work together? So I guess I'm going to move now to Dr. Chioke. From your perspective, will investors' perception change when multiple states collaborate versus when they act independently? We heard today, during the course of your presentation, about how great Enugu is doing. Mm-hmm. Would investors be more interested in, flowing their capital to only Enugu, even where SCDC has come with a plan that speaks to the entire region? What would be the things that would, what are the considerations for them to go one way or the other?
Thank you. The biggest challenge for Enugu, even if it continues to develop at the pace it's going, would be its size. The southeastern states as a whole unit, the whole 30,000 square kilometers would fit several times in some of the states. Niger, probably is over 60,000 square kilometers. Taraba is over 50,000 square kilometers. Kaduna is close to 60,000 square kilometers. So when you think about the southeastern states, the biggest challenge you have with each state acting individually is scale, the small size. If you think now that the amount of power being wheeled from Transco, Transmission Company of Nigeria, through EEDC is under 100 megawatts for the entire region. Yeah? Now, if one state wants to say, I want to do a 400 megawatt power plant, it's too small to absorb all that power. But one 400 megawatt power plant can do a whole lot for the region. So it's important that the region collaborates. I think this is where the SCDC's role becomes paramount, because it can itself develop that plan, look at all the bankability issues, and discuss with the lenders, find out the guarantees required both from the federal government, from the state, and how to perfect the guarantees of the state so it transcends political actors, And there are ways to do that, like getting a federal government ISPO that lasts from, political party or government to another, and then be able to put that plan together. Allows us to then go and raise the sort of $500 million required to execute. And the beauty of it is that once such a plan is available, the Southeast diaspora is actually sufficient to fund it. They brought in $4 billion, mostly for consumption. We're doing weddings, wine carrying, chieftaincy. People are just showing up with brand new cars and houses for Christmas. But we could do better. And the money is there, but we need to get the scale to attract the right kind of investments. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's interesting when you see some videos on social media of the mansions in the Southeast, and next to those mansions are potholes and very tiny roads. And you wonder what exactly is wrong with us as a people. But that is changing thanks to the SCDC. Moving now to Dr. Takang. Public assets in Nigeria are still largely structured at institutional and state levels, rather than as an integrated economic system. From the Murphy's vantage point, what structural changes are required to move us from these isolated state assets to regional bankable asset platforms, such that the federating units legally and financially pool assets together without losing their sovereignty?
Thank you very much. So I think contrary to what many people might think, a lot of the assets we talk about, by the way, for those of you from the Southeast, your son, Dr. Chioke, is a member of Murphy Board, and he represents the interest of the Southeast, in case he didn't tell you. So he brings a lot of expertise, and he has used that expertise to help a lot of states and a lot of other regions. It would be a real shame that the Southeast, especially SCDC, does not use that expertise to its advantage. And incidentally, the MD of SCDC is an alumni of AfriInvest. So coming back to your question, there's a fundamental issue around assets. So one thing that I will clearly say is that the SCDC needs to create a register of assets owned by either the region or the individual states. Because the establishment of an assets register does a number of things. It shows what you own, how much it is worth, so you can begin to determine how to sweat those assets. And as it turns out, a lot of our Land Use Act cedes the power of ownership of lands to the state government. So, and that is one area where a lot of state governments have failed to live up to their responsibilities, because most of the lands in Nigeria either do not have proper titles or they have defective titles. And globally within the states, it's over $900 billion of lost value in Nigeria as a result of either defective titles or non-existent titles. So when we talk about assets, I believe that is the starting point. All the southeastern state governments have no business why any piece of land in the southeast should not have proper titles. Let's start from there. Because what that does is that it allows you to unlock a lot of value. Most of us are traders across all the states, and we need to unlock capital to support our businesses. And many of them have lands, but the lands are not titled. And as a result, instead of them being able to have access to capital using that landed property with proper titles, they are going to borrow money at 3-4% per month to do their business, which doesn't make any sense. So they are losing money. So for me, that is the first thing. Let's have SCDC. If you can get all the state governments to get all the lands in the southeast titled within the next 24 to 36 months, it can be done, and it must be done. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that the SEC might lend more voice to that when it comes to blockchain. With the advent of blockchain, it means we can now, once we have the titles, we can now put those assets on the blockchain. Around that, it means that people cannot fraudulently steal your land from you regardless of where you are. The second is that you can begin to raise capital on the back of that blockchain where the land titles are seeded. That becomes a key part of your asset management strategy. The third part is that the Southeast and most state governments are too small to do major infrastructure projects. I was speaking to Lagos one time, and I said to Lagos governor, you are #1 in IGR, but let's look at your IGR and even your budget. At that point, I think it was in 2024, the budget for Lagos State was about 3.5 trillion naira. And I gave them one example of a project we're working with them, the Lagos Green Line. That project alone is at least $3 billion to do a metro line from Marina to the Lekki Free Trade Zone, 70 kilometers. We're doing the project. We're actually putting together the project. And I said, even Lagos cannot do that project. So when we talk about the transmission line in the southeast, we talk about the rail line, whether it's for goods or for metro, you talk about water across the southeast. None of these southeastern states has the capacity to do that. Dr. Chioke, you gave the example of FAC allocations 1.1 trillion, IGR 300, that's 1.4 trillion naira across the entire region, right? That's less than $1 billion for the entire region. And by the time you look at their expenses, there's not much left for you to do any project. So the other thing that I believe that the region has to do is begin to partner with federal government. That's why the federal government is there. Whether it is in terms of being able to negotiate terms for sovereign guarantee, which is what we're doing on our road projects. The Green Line, we already secured a federal government sovereign guarantee. And our argument is that you cannot talk about it without Lagos. And so if Lagos is contributing that much, then it makes sense that the federal government should come to its rescue. Same thing with the Southeast. If we're seeing the Southeast as a major manufacturing hub that contributes to the economy of Nigeria, I believe that the Southeast should come as a bloc to negotiate those specific provisions, including getting sovereign guarantee for bankable projects. We cannot, and I say this as someone from the regional solar, from Abia State, we cannot continue to play the victim politics. It's a negotiating politics. So if we're talking about politics and economy, we need to go to the table and negotiate as equal parties to it. Coming back to that, look at the voters' registration. Our registration in Southeast is abysmal. How do you go to negotiate when you don't even want to register to vote? So I think that's something that we need to become politically conscious when it comes to things like that as a region, to help us boost that. Because the guy sitting in Abuja is looking, hang on a minute, if I'm calculating, because that's a reality. The guy is sitting thinking, okay, where do I allocate resources? They look at the numbers. The whole of Southeast is less than a few local governments in another region. Where do you think they're going to prioritize it in terms of resource allocation? So we need to begin to understand the dynamics of politics when it comes to the center. And I say that because I've been in the center for 20 years and I see how decisions are made. I was in the budget office for 6 years, I was in the Ministry of Finance for 6 years, and I see how resources move and the basis for that. So we need to begin to play smart politics. It's not victim politics. It's just the politics of numbers. Because if you don't do that, someone's going to look, okay, you are less than half of Niger State. Your population is a fraction of other population. Most of us from the Southeast don't even reside in the Southeast. So our contribution to Nigeria's economy is attributed to other regions. So we're already disadvantaged. So how do we begin to make sure we use this scale and the unity of purpose, the unity of assets to negotiate better resources to our own advantage? Finally, let our governors not see themselves as godfathers that people come to them. They have to go out there and market and get resources and know that they are in the marketplace competing for resources. I went to Niger State, we're doing a project with them, a pilot project. We said we're going to partner with you to convert your idle land to productive communities. I called the governor on Wednesday. The minister and I called the governor on Wednesday. He was in Saudi. He committed to us that by Friday morning he will be in Abuja. He came to Friday morning, he signed an MOU and promised us that by Monday, he will bring the CFOs. True to his word, the CFOs were ready on Monday for 100,000 hectares. Full CFO, we didn't have to pay anything. Now, when you are in that situation where you're competing with other governors that are that fast, committed, you are at a disadvantage. You really are. So, it is important that we understand these realities. Otherwise, we can speak all the grammar we want, have all the plans we want, we will not be able to mobilize the resources that we need to execute this. Thank you very much.
It's as if Dr. Takang
knew that I was about to wrap up the session, and I was going to ask each panelist to, leave us with some tangible next step for the governors and everyone in the Southeast. I think you've taken your own slot, so we're going to jump you. So starting with Mr. Mueller, if you were the lead consultant for the Southeast Governors Forum tomorrow, what is one specific action or reform they must announce in the next 100 days to prove that the financing of Vision 2050 has officially moved from dream to actual potential?
Okay, thank you. Mr. Chioke mentioned a financing structure in the market, a FAC ISPO. So a lot of states have issued bonds to investors basically since 1978. So we've had 40-some years of no defaults on state government bonds, but they've all been backed by the FAC ISPO, which is managed by the debt office in Abuja. It gives investors confidence. But many people say that's the gold standard for local currency financing in Nigeria, is to get a FAC ISPO from Abuja. If the 5 states sign some sort of agreement that said we are going to pool our available capital under the FAC ISPO, we're all committing this toward a set of infrastructure projects that we intend to do over the next few years, that would be a big confidence boost to show that they're ready to collectively back projects. And I do want to, as a final word, there are assets that are underutilized. We talked yesterday about stranded assets. There are existing assets that can leverage today. So obviously Geometric is there. Alaoji and IPP is also in Aba. It's one of the least utilized power plants. Today it has that capacity. Seplat just commissioned the Ano gas field in Imo, making Imo a gas-producing state. Anambra is already a gas-producing state. So the gas is already there and being sent out of the region to power industrial zones elsewhere. 9th Mile Enugu is not connected to a gas line. Newi industrial area in Anambra is not connected to a gas pipeline. So we already have the assets. We just need to work together and start putting the infrastructure in place. Thank you.
Ms. Okoli, final words, please.
Sure. So one thing I wanted to mention earlier was the agriculture. You talked about the sustainability, right? So there's so much agriculture in the East. I met somebody here who they have a plantation of palm kernels. There's so much that can happen through that. So with job creation, community building, etc., that's one thing that I wanted to add on to that. But for the next 100 days, I'm very interested in seeing that dashboard with the metrics, right? So we're going to have our set metrics of what we're going to do for the next, even if we can't do it for 2050, for the next year, next 5 years, what are the goals that we want to see? What do I take back to the UIE community and say, hey, this is what SCDC is helping the Southeast region build and do? And that way we can hold us accountable, because it's not just a SCDC thing, this is an everybody thing. This is a Southeastern region activity that we have to do because we're trying to build our country back. So we want to make sure that metric is there. We have something we can hold each other accountable on, and we'll continue to grow that way.
Thank you so much. Mr. Ijolo, please.
I think in the next 100 days, it would be good if we could have the Southeast Governors Forum announce a Southeast regional facility for project preparation and de-risking. If we can have that, that would be fantastic. And it should be accompanied with seed funding, commitment from each of the states, named transaction advisors, and a clear mandate on a targeted number of projects for which we want to see financial closure by a set date. I think that would be very good.
Fantastic. Thank you. Dr. Agama, please. Okay. Dr. Chioke.
I think for me, what I'd like to see as a takeaway for the governors of the Southeast is their commitment to establishing the standards of governance, accountability, discipline, and disclosure required to access funds from the capital markets. We are talking today about just under 27 trillion naira of funding held by the pension funds. We are talking today the size of the bond market at 70 trillion naira, the size of the equity market at 100 trillion naira, 106 actually trillion naira as of this end of January. And then remittance inflows about 6 to 7 trillion naira annually, mostly going into consumption. So the ability to be disciplined and give us audited accounts, register the state as a member of the defined contribution pension scheme, make sure you have a pay of the backlog of unpaid pensions or have a plan for how you pay that, introduce life insurance for your staff. Those things simply enable you to come into the window that the DG of sectors talked about, to be able to access the trillions of naira available that is far in excess of your internally generated revenue. I know that states like Enugu are doing very well, expanding IGR, but the governor has told us he wants to move the GDP of Enugu from $4 billion to $30 billion. He can get there much faster if he can leverage the capital markets alongside the growth of IGR. And that's what I'd like them to do. That's the low-hanging fruit. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Chioke. Dr. Agama, please.
To do some justice to my final word.
Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, great. So, clearly for me, I will start with this. The southeast of Nigeria is no longer just a collection of 5 states. It is now a single unified economic corridor under the Southeast Development Commission. And through the SEC, we have built the regulatory highway for you to drive your investment home safely. Having taken that quote, it's important that in my final statement, one thing that needs to be done in the next 100 days to justify why we are here, why we are all seated here, and why we have come from far and near, is to make sure that there is a bond template. That bond template is the SEDC bond template. Of course, I'm trying to, great, fantastic. But before that, we need to understand certain things. Because if you do not understand from the beginning, you do not know where you are getting to. And of course, as the Southeast region moves towards a more structured economy, because what is happening here is historic. It's historic because the Southeast Development Commission is the one doing it first. I am jealous, but yet I have to do it. Why am I jealous? I am from the South-South. So I should be doing this for the South-South, not the Southeast. But then I don't have a choice. Mark took me up on it, and he has gotten the juice out of the matter. So, according to the PEBEC and fiscal performance, I want to show you exactly where we are as states in the Southeast region. Sometimes, if you do not know the basis of a problem, you actually would not know how to solve it. You assume, and yet you'll be floating. So please move on. Let's see if you can get it out. Yeah, who is there? Right. Technology, of course, is one of the things we need to do with the Southeast. So, let's, right. So, what I wanted to show there before it comes up is what are the comparative analysis of the Southeast states. Yeah, 2025, 2020, beautiful. So you see that, right? Enugu State is ranked number 6th in terms of ease of doing business, national ranking 2025. The score metric is 56.2. The core strength as far as we are concerned, is digital service delivery and land administration. What is the strategic challenge? Power infrastructure reliability. That is Enugu State. Anambra, top 10, number 1 on fiscal, highest fiscal transparency, and number 1 in revenue prudence. Strategic challenge, high kidnapping, ransom cost, and security. Abia, top 15, 77% capex, leading the nation in budget allocation to infrastructure, legacy debt, and wage arrears. That is the strategic challenge. Ebonyi, top 20, high capex, strong focus on road networks and market hubs. The greatest challenge, access to skilled technical labor. Of course, Imo, bottom tier, low fiscal rank, robust commerce and hospitality sectors, weakest fiscal management in the region. Move on, please. Can you move up? Right, it has to come back again. Okay, that is technology. Right. So, the key indicator breakdowns are clear. Of course, for digital connectivity and land, Enugu is tops. For fiscal performance, Anambra is tops. Infrastructure spending, Abia and Ebonyi. Security headwind, of course. Across all 5 states, the sit-at-home orders and general insecurity remain the primary depressants for foreign direct investment between 2021 and 2025. The region saw an estimated loss, which is critical, of worth between 655 billion and 3.8 trillion due to these disparities and disruptions, which remains the single biggest hurdle for capital market participation. What are the strategic recommendations? Can we move forward? So, if you are looking at the table, the most stable yield via subnational bonds will be Anambra and Enugu, present the lowest risk due to their high fiscal transparency and regulatory reform momentum. For high growth venture capital, Abia, which offers the highest potential for industrial scaling provided by the current infrastructure reforms, has continued. To determine which Southeast states have the headroom for new bond issuance in 2026, we must look at the debt sustainability index. If you move up, you will find it. So you find the headroom. Please move up. There's another table there. Yeah, go up. Go. All right. So by the next page, you will see exactly what we need to do to be able to get there. What is the headroom? What is the capacity? What gives us the stomach to absorb debts and capital that we need to develop these states? So, but a state alone cannot do it. So look at it. The total public debt estimate for Anambra is 187.9 billion. The total revenue, FAC and IGR, 352. Debt to revenue ratio, 53.4%. The headroom verdict, fiscal leader, Ebonyi. The total debt, 157.9. Total accruance, 3.12. Of course, the debt to revenue ratio, 50 point. Strongest headroom, region's leanest. And Abia has 375.2 billion debt to total public debt, with total FAC and IGR coming at 360. You see that the debt is actually helping to move the revenue, but debt to revenue ratio is 104 with moderate headroom, and last is Enugu with 180.5 and 826.0 billion in terms of the combination. Of course, 21.8% exceptional headroom, revenue outperformer. And IMO, 126 billion, 205 public debt, 61.5, low headroom, high debt service. Yes, so this clearly shows what the situation is. What are the strategic insights for our roadmap? The strategic insights are: 1, the revenue powerhouse is Enugu, and the investor takeaway, which is likely and have the capacity for a bond in 2026 without risking a default, whereas Ebonyi is the prudent saver, which has the investor takeaway, making the ability to create green bonds. And then the Abia is the industrial hub, What should we do, basically, and why do we need to have this? In the next 100 days, what should happen is that the Southeast Development Commission must have a bond template that speaks to investment across this region. The reason is simple, because if you put all of this in a basket, the risk to each state will reduce. And since the risk to each state is reduced, the ability to raise capital for the development of the corridors of this state will increase. And if that increases, it will improve the revenue and IGR of this state, bringing about strong development for this region, which should be our industrial elephant, the manufacturing hub of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. We can